the Middle East prior to joining Garment Education in 2021. So please, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Martin on the stage. Mr. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Making sure that I get the microphone here. Brilliant. We have the PowerPoint. Okay, good to see you all here today. Quite a tricky ask following those first two talks. There were three things that struck me about the last workshop and our esteemed Dean's talk at the beginning of today's sessions. And those three things were, number one, anxiety. The Dean mentioned anxiety, and the previous speaker also mentioned anxiety in different contexts. The anxiety of our new reality, the anxiety of being a learner, and also the anxiety of being a teacher in the new context. Also, the previous speaker mentioned moderation. So whatever techniques we have, whatever tools we have, whatever new things we have to learn, remember that we always have to use them in moderation. And there's one more thing that really hit me, and I think it comes up in today's workshop, is the fact that the changes that we experienced in 2020 are possibly here to stay, for better or for worse. The things that we learned to deal with very abruptly in 2020 will have ramifications and applications for quite some time. And I think we can see it really on many scales, especially with the economy, is that we're starting to pay the price for 2 years of basic inertia. So I thought I would use this as my first slide, because one of my trainers when I was much younger always taught me it's good to start a workshop or a training with an anecdote. And here's my anecdote for today. Here's a post that I posted on Facebook on the very early morning of March the 11th, 2020. It was a unusual and yet surreal moment. I just finished doing 2 weeks of teacher training across Kazakhstan in my old job as a teacher trainer for OUP. It seemed a relatively normal trip, although during the trip, a lot of people were talking about this virus that was going around. When I arrived in Kazakhstan 2 weeks earlier, I was greeted by people wearing hazmat suits, and they were testing our temperature on arrival. And I thought, this is a little bit weird. This reminds me about when I was in Korea in January. So in January 2020, I was in Korea doing some teacher training, and they were testing our temperatures and making sure that we were okay when we came in. Then in March, when I entered Kazakhstan, they said, oh, you know, you've got to take your temperature. And in the last session I did on the 10th of March 2020, the university that I was training at didn't let me in without wearing a mask. And I thought, that's really strange. That's a little bit racist, really. But things were getting a little bit anxious. Little did I know that if I'd left Kazakhstan 3 days later, I would have been stuck there for 4 months. And little did I know that that was my last teacher training trip for 19 months. Things changed very quickly after that. And then we were suddenly thrown into an unreal reality. So the 3,000 teachers that I was supposed to train in Uzbekistan 2 weeks later suddenly became my first ever teacher training experience online using something horrible called Adobe Connect. We were not used to it. None of us had even heard of Zoom. I remember a colleague, you might know my colleague, Alex Mavrakis. He sometimes used to come to Q8. I know Dr. Marine knows him. He discovered this thing called Zoom. And we thought, oh, don't be silly, we've got Skype. Yeah, none of us have heard of Teams. So things changed. Things changed for better or for worse. Now things are back to normal, kind of. But it's the new normal, isn't it? And when people talk about the new normal, when the new normal came, people thought the new normal would be a temporary normal. But it's now a new normal, which is kind of getting old normal. And so we have two types of lessons now. We have a face-to-face lesson, and we have online lessons, and we have the dreaded hybrid lessons. And the hybrid lessons and the hybrid trainings are the ones that we fear the most. I did some hybrid trainings in Saudi Arabia this week for Arab Open University with those of you who are teachers here at AOU. We did training with about 100 or so teachers face to face, and who knows how many online, because I couldn't see them. I believe it was about 150, but that's just an estimate. So, in any language lesson, what is more important? Is it what you want students to know about the language, or what you want them to do with the language? Is it the first? The second? Okay, do we have a microphone and a compare? Yeah. Do you want to be a microphone duty? Okay, who says the second one? A few of you said the second one. Yes, dear. So language is all about communication. Any other ideas? Yes, we have one over here. Okay, well, don't throw it. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if it works. There you go, it works. Okay, it's good to know about both of them, to know the mechanics of the language and also to know what to do with the language. And one more, the gentleman here. Good. One last one. Thank you very much. I can't quite hear that. I'm not sure if the microphone actually works or it just has a psychological effect on the person speaking.
I think we have to know and what you do for them to decide.
It's for them to decide. Okay. But if it's transformative and if it's a language lesson, I would say, wouldn't you say it's the second one, what they want to do with the language, rather than to be linguists? What I noticed in a lot of the lessons that I've been observing over the last few months, the last 20 years, is very often that teachers sometimes focus on their own interests, i.e. linguistics, rather than the student's interest, which is more practical English. We have to remember that the students are mostly learning English for the sake of international communication and academic excellence. And sometimes we need to focus on the doing rather than, yeah, yes, there's one more, participant, yes. That's okay. I don't think it's only working psychologically because is this one work? Try this one. It is a placebo microphone. Mhm. The microphone isn't working here. Can we try this? Because I think this is important. Because we want the people at home to be the hearing as well. Is that one working? Don't be shy. That one's working. Okay. There we go.
What are you targeting? So, if you want to push a question specific and that lesson, push to the second one, maybe, because we're talking about skills. Maybe the second one. However, if you scrutinize both answers, you would go back to honesty, competence and performance. Now, we're talking about competence and the ability to know about the language and have linguistics for English regular students, people who become like linguists or teachers, whatever, they would have to know about the language. So teaching them about the language. But of course, the foundation paragraph is still paragraph. They have to know how to use it. They have to so both of them are fine. However, each one serves different functions.
We've got a bit of a IT thing going on here. Where's the IT guy going? Okay, let's go back to the careful. There's a slide I don't want you to see. So yeah, back in March, April, May 2020, the publishers all over the world were saying, we realize that you can't teach face-to-face because there's a massive pandemic going on. Here's a free copy of our ebooks. And so everybody started using ebooks. However, there was one big however. The structure of, as we know now, the structure of online classes is very different to the structure of a face-to-face class. But I don't think anybody realized that at the time because we're too busy staying alive, weren't we? We were in a panic. And I think now we think back to it. I think now the whole world seems to be in a state of denial and a little bit of trauma about what happened. We still haven't come to terms with what happened. And I don't think publishers, and I speak as a publisher from Garnet, I don't think we've caught up yet. I don't think there is yet a resource that can translate to the new online or hybrid context. We're still stuck in a CELTA model of pre-2020. So going back, yes. Yeah. Yes.
So we are trying to develop at three frontiers.
I know.
The curriculum or whatever material is published, and also the technological tool that is being, which is what we need also incorporate the cultural, personal elements and parts in there.
Yeah, so Rania has mentioned three things there. You've mentioned that the student has to cope with the new reality, the teacher has to cope with the new reality, and the technology has to adapt to those two. And then I would multiply it by 3, because often we're teaching face-to-face, online, and hybrid. It's almost like 3 squared. So that's 9. So the 9 new realities. It's absolutely crazy. So let's go back to 2019, and I have a task for you. I want you to put yourself back in 2019 and imagine preparing for a class in 2019, and imagine the feelings that you have after a class in 2019. I'm going to show you in a moment a teacher's journal from 2019. I'm going to ask you to spend just 2 minutes reading this teacher's journal from 2019. And then I'm going to ask you a very simple yes/no question. Okay, so you have 2 minutes to read something, and then I will ask you a very simple yes/no question. Hey Siri, set the timer for 2.5 minutes. Always give it an extra half minute, Siri, because he's a bit sleepy. And okay. I'm not sure if the guys online managed to see it. I hope they did. Supposed to. Now, what I would like to do now is to stand up. That's not the question, that's just a command. Could you please stand up? Thank you very much. Okay. The very simple question that I'm going to ask you is, was that a good lesson? If you think yes, please stand in this aisle. If you think no, please stand in this aisle. There's no sitting on the fence. There's no gray areas. It's either a yay or a nay. So yes, in this aisle. No, in this aisle. So the yeses and the nos, for those of you at home, around about 30%, 30 or 40% are saying yes. I would say about 50% are saying no, and there's a couple of people sitting on the fence. Okay, let's hear from, where's the microphone, dude? There he is. They're going to shout. Okay, those of you who thought yes, tell me why. Yep, go. Okay, same start to PPP. Yeah, he thinks it's a good lesson because they're doing self PPP. Okay, good. Any other yeses? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the lady here says the sequence, the structure was coherent and clear. Okay, good. And the no's, by the way, there are more no's than yeses. They're quite a negative bunch here today. Anxiety. Go on. Not engaging enough. Yeah. One more.
There are more creative ways to do something like this. You can just ask them the question and go to the answer to that. You can play some games, you can create some worksheets. You can ask them to imagine themselves traveling to a journey and ask them to tell you the experience. So there are more creative ways to use it for better like this.
Okay, the lady here says, yeah, says it kind of is too ambiguous and the teacher needs to be more assertive. And one more no. There's Dr. No there. The blue polo, you raise your hand and then, yes, you, yeah. Okay, yeah. So, gentleman in the blue polo, the smiling, handsome guy, is saying that there's too much going on, it's too busy. Okay, it's interesting that we have Celta Dude said yes. Said yes, it is a good lesson because it's well staged. What they often tell you in the CELTA is before you do your lesson plan, you should write the aim of the lesson. Let's see the aim of the lesson and then decide whether it was a good lesson or not. Yeah, you can sit, but you need to decide. You need to, can we sit? Wish your students were like that. Yeah. So, were the aims of the lesson good or not? To provide a spoken written practice of the present perfect tense in the context of ambition? Does ambition happen in the past, present, or the future when we think about ambition? When we're thinking about ambition, do we think about the recent past? Future. So what the teacher did there, he or she set the context in the wrong tense. So it was, in fact, it was a bad lesson because we have to always match the context with the language. And as teachers, we're focused more on structure and process, but students are always focused on context. So if you set the context in the wrong place, then the students won't necessarily follow you and you'll be wondering why. So that was the teacher's reflection. And now, because we're running a little low on time, going to give you the lesson plan. Yes. It's everyone. It's one machine too, I think. It compares. Very quickly. Yeah, you can open the lesson plans, but there's one slight problem. When I was flying into Kuwait Airport yesterday, the lesson plans got caught in the X-ray machine and they got jammed. And the lesson plan got shredded. Don't blame me, blame the guys at the airport. You know what it's like. Every time you come through here, they check the X-ray your bags. The X-ray shredded all the lesson plans. So what I did yesterday evening, it took me ages. I got all the lesson plans that were shredded by the X-ray machine, and I put them into individual envelopes so that you guys could put them back together again. Now this is quite tricky here. So I'm going to give you a hand because we don't have much time either. So this is what the original lesson plan looked like. Of course, I'm actually, because we have a virtual audience today and they cannot do this activity, I'm going to put the lesson plan together for you. And this is what it looks like. Now, it's what's your name? Adele. So Adele, who was one of the guys who said it was a good lesson earlier, the guy for sure. Adele will recognize the structure of this. This is a very CELTA structured style lesson. Now, the problem with this is that it's twofold because CELTA is probably the dominant teacher training style across the world. And rightly so, because it's a great certificate. I remember doing the CELTA many years ago. And it was the most traumatic 4 weeks of my life, but I also enjoyed it because I did it in Canada, and it was almost like a working holiday. But what the problem is that most textbooks follow this plan. Now, if we look at the next slide, a CELTA style makes things very bite-sized, because you can see here that in a CELTA style lesson, there's almost like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stages. And you've got the sub-stages there. So when you have this kind of structure, it's very easy for, say, for example, a 30-minute lesson or a 45-minute lesson or a 1-hour lesson or a 90-minute lesson to have some kind of stretchability, contractibility. Because, for example, if you only have a 30-minute class, you might only do the first 2, 3 sections. And then in the next class, you do the next section. And a lot of language course books have developed like that. I think about my favorite language course book of all time, Market Leader. It's a business English course from Pearson. Absolutely great course. It has this structure throughout the unit. And the last part of the book is a case study, which is like the green task here stretched over 90 minutes. So don't think that everything here can be done in one lesson. Sometimes, ideally it can, but sometimes it might be spread over several lessons. Now, the problem is when we go on to online planning, how does the framework change? As you have found out over the last 2 years, the structure of an online class is very different to the structure of a face-to-face class. And then when we go into hybrid lessons, which structure do we follow? It's the same for me as a teacher trainer. Last week, I was in Riyadh at AOU. Yeah, it's okay. So yeah, there's no more secret slides, so it's fine. Last week, I was in Riyadh doing hybrid training at AOU. I had in front of me 25 really hungry, passionate, great teachers. Those of you at AOU, they're your colleagues over there, they're doing a great job. I had another 25, 30 teachers online who I couldn't see. And in spite of my best efforts, I focus on the people in front of me. It's natural, isn't it? Yes. And the dominant, this one, yeah. The dominant style is quite naturally the people who are in front of me. I will cater to those because I can read their faces. I can't read the faces that I can see online, that I can't see online. And it's really difficult, and we're still coming to terms with it, aren't we? So you need to ask yourself these questions when you're planning your lesson. How do we change things for online learning? How do we change things for HyFlex? HyFlex, a portmanteau of hybrid and flexible. If we could split a 120-hour course into online lessons, would we use the same lesson length? Your classes at the moment could vary from 40-minute classes to 3-hour classes. The AOE guys in Saudi are 2-hour lessons. That could work on a face-to-face context, but online, is that a bit long? Also, when we were younger teachers and we're fresh and we're new to this craft, we would often do warmers and fillers. They were great, weren't they? To separate the mundane from the practical. We would sometimes do warmers and fillers to lead in and lead out of language instruction. But how can we do warmers and fillers when people are online and you can't see their face and they've got their camera on mute, the microphone on mute and the camera switched off? How do we do warmers and fillers then? Are they relevant? How conscious also are we of those nuanced things like mixed abilities, fast finishes? When a student finishes online, how do we know if they've finished if we can't see them? How do we know if they're engaged? how do we know if they don't have their feet up and they're playing Xbox? I'm sure some of your students got very good at FIFA during lockdown. I know I did. So then we look at the structure again, and then we have to look at it through fresh eyes. And it's difficult when we've been doing the same thing really well for years and years, and a lot of us have developed our skills. We've gone from being novice teachers to CELTA teachers to Delta teachers, doing masters, etc. And then all of a sudden in 2020, someone pressed the reset button and we had to learn things from absolute scratch. And also we had to overwrite a lot of the things that we perceived as being gospel. This is what I've come up with, but this is just the best guess. And it's not based on any research, simply because I'm not teaching anymore. I do very little teaching, but this is how I would perhaps move things around for the new context. But this is just a compromise. This is a compromise because, and I said this at a university in Saudi Arabia a few weeks ago, and I got into a lot of trouble with the dean, because they were using something that wasn't Garnet. And I said, and I can quote myself, I said, none of the books that are written and are published on the market at the moment are written for the post-pandemic world. And it's true. It's true. I know I've worked in publishing for 15 years, and I know it takes 2 years to develop a course book. And it hasn't been 2 years since March 2020. Well, it has been, but in March 2020, everybody was panicking and firing everybody. But there hasn't been a post-pandemic course book published yet. And so everybody is just guessing and fiddling around. So this is how I would structure a CELTA lesson for the post-pandemic world. I would get rid of the GIST tasks. Because in a hybrid context, it'd be really tricky to do the GIST task. And I would also, in an ideal world, I would flip the classroom. But we've been talking about flipping the classroom for 15, 20 years. And in the Arab world, we don't really flip the classroom, because flipping the classroom depends on close to 90 to 100% participation and engagement. And we know that around about 30 or 40% of our students in a foundation year context won't do the flipped task, and therefore the flipped task cannot be completed satisfactorily. So it's all a bit of a guesswork at the moment, isn't it? So let's look at some coping strategies. Are your online classes too long? We could try the Pomodoro technique, which is famous for in the context of self-studying or in research. They say that if you spend more than half an hour doing something, your mind will burn out before you'll realize it. So you could try this for your online classes. Pick a task, in other words, teach. Set a 25-minute timer. Work on your task, in other words, teach, until the time is up. Then take a 5-minute break. And then you can't see it. After 4 Pomodoros, get it? After 4 Pomodoros, take a 30-minute break. So if you have a 2-hour online class, take a break after 25 minutes for 5 minutes. If you have got a 2-hour class, don't do a 10-minute break after 1 hour, because everyone's shattered by then. Are pre-pandemic course books relevant? That's a controversial question that got me into trouble in Saudi. They are relevant, but you have got to adapt them. How do we measure the efficacy of an online class versus face-to-face? How much formative assessment are you doing in your online classes? Ask yourself that. How much observation is taking place in your online classes? Are your online classes being observed? Finally, classroom management. I was observing some online classes at AOU, your colleagues at AOU in Saudi Arabia, about a month ago. And in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, I saw a list of students. Unfortunately, the list of students was somewhat obscured by their code number. So it would have class, code, slash, and then you'd see the beginning of the student name. So you'd see class 521 slash year 1 slash Jeddah slash Maha. I guess his name was Mohammed, but you couldn't see because the rest of the name is missing. Now, when a teacher is looking at a list of names, a linear list of names, how does the teacher imagine it? Before I came here today, I imagined this auditorium to be more or less similar to what it is, only the seats were yellow. It's funny how you imagine things before you go there. So do you imagine your online classes to look like this? No. Do you imagine them to look like this? No. This? No. This? No. We just imagine them as a list, don't we? So perhaps you could tell your online students, imagine you're in this room. When you do a breakout room, tell them, imagine you're here. You could use any of these, and you could say to your students, okay, now we're in the theatre. Now we're in the banquet room. Now we're in a T-shaped scenario. Get your students thinking about where they are. Let them use their imagination. The students still remember face-to-face classes, even if you don't think they do. Finally, one last point about neglected online participants. Now, this is all common sense, but what I've noticed from my observations of online classes is that online teachers tend to always nominate the same students again and again and again. The same students volunteer again and again and again. And there seems to be a tacit agreement, although everyone knows it's wrong, that the teacher won't nominate the student whose camera is switched off and is on mute if the student whose camera is switched off and is on mute doesn't do anything wrong. So from an online class of 50 students, sometimes there are only 5 participants, 10 participants. So what you've got to do is make a list of students and make sure in every class that you involve every single learner and carry out some kind of formative assessment accordingly. And then the students will suddenly become motivated to join the classes because they know that you're shouting them out. You've got to call them out. And after several classes, the magic will happen and hopefully they'll start participating. That is the end of my workshop. My apologies for it being less interactive due to the auditorium and the hybrid nature